Slava Isusu Christu, glory be to Jesus Christ. Welcome to our Bishop Velychkovsky Martyr Shrine. Today we will be continuing our series on the Modern Day Martyr, on the life of Blessed Vasyl Velychkovsky, whose holy relics we have here in Winnipeg, Canada, his fully intact body. Our episode today, it's a longer story, but it's one that probably began our research on Blessed Vasyl. Back in 2003, the following summer after we had enshrined his holy relics here at St. Joseph's Church, 3 Basilian sisters came to visit his holy relics here from Toronto, from Mississauga to be exact. And they told our shrine workers that there were some documents that were buried in a garden in Lviv in one of their underground monasteries, a house. And they were planning to sell that house and move back into the monastery. However, in the garden, the Blessed Vasyl had buried some documents, and they were too old to look for those documents. My staff wanted to go immediately to Ukraine to look for them. I wasn't that enthused, but that fall, at Christmas, I went to Mississauga and I spoke with these sisters, and they told me about other Basilian sisters who knew Blessed Vasyl very well and would be worth talking to. So I decided there and then that the following summer in 2004, we would travel to Lviv and interview those sisters, and thus began our whole journey of 10 years or so. We had over 70 interviews with people who knew Blessed Vasyl. We came to that house where the sisters were living still, and we asked them about the documents, and they said, oh yeah, they were buried here. And they said, well, can you show us where? Well, it's in the garden. It wasn't us, it was Sister Theophilia who buried them. But she's not here. And as we were discussing and having our interviews with these sisters, Sister Theophilia walks through the door. So I immediately asked her about the documents. Says, oh yes, we put it in the bottle, sealed it with some wax, and I buried it in the garden, just outside the house. I said, well, show me. So she took me outside, and there between a pear tree and what was a nut tree, maybe half a meter in the ground, I buried this bottle. Well, that was back in 1960, probably 68 or late 67. So that was like 40 years later when we were there, almost 40 years. Well, by that time, the pear tree had grown up and the nut tree was now just a stump. I didn't have time at that moment to begin digging. So in about a week later, we came to dig with some help of some seminarians and an older priest who knew of this story. So we dig. Well, the pear tree had grown many roots. So to dig around those roots and trying and getting down, we made a fairly huge hole already between the pear tree and the nut tree, but no bottle. There was a particular root that my co-worker Mary Jane saw that was very straight, like an arrow. And she says, well, perhaps that root is showing us the direction. Being lack of faith or whatever, I dismissed that comment. But as we're about, after an hour and a half of digging, we were ready to kind of quit. One of the sisters, Sister Josefa, comes outside and says, well, since you have already dug so far, the stump is really in our way. Can you dig out the stump? And as we're digging out the stump on my third shovel, I hear a clank. And I look down, and there is a jar, dirty, dark brown jar with some mud on it, and I pick it up. It's in a plastic bag, and to my disappointment, one of the nuns said, no, that is not it. But I look inside the bottle, and there is something inside this bottle. And so we bring the bottle to the house, and Father Yakimetz, who was with me, wanted. We opened the bottle, and you could see it was damp inside, and the documents were also sealed in a cellophane wrap, and I didn't want to open them right then because I was afraid of tearing them. And so I told Father we have to wait before we can open these up. And so we sealed the bottle up again. And I had to leave to Ivano-Frankivsk for an interview that afternoon. And so we couldn't open the bottle until we got back to the Basilian monastery that evening. And we opened it up and with tweezers carefully opened 3 documents. 2 were on paper, and the 3rd document was on a piece of cloth. It was typed on the cloth. We were looking at them and trying to decipher those documents. When who would enter this monastery, a different monastery, but like 9:30 at night, c.s.s.r. Teofilya came in. When I heard that she arrived, I called her over right away, and she looked at the bottle and said, No, it was a small wine bottle. I asked her, well, did you bury anything else? She says, no. And then she stopped and began to think. Says, we were preparing this small wine bottle, drying it out, preparing it, but I think at the very last moment, the documents wouldn't fit through the top of the bottle. And so we took this brown jar and put it in there, hoping that would be dry enough and appropriate enough for these documents. And so there she was trying to look at these documents and look at them, and you'll see that they are worn through age. The cloth document was pretty good, but the others were worn and cracked. One document was from the Basilian Superior, written May the 3rd, 1967, when Blessed Vasyl was in Yugoslavia. Or perhaps when he was in Yugoslavia, he wrote to the Basilian Superior and he replied back to him and gave him this document. Or we don't know whether he sent it to Ukraine or how it got to Ukraine. I expect he took it with himself back when he came back to Ukraine from his visit to his sister. It was a letter from the Basilian Superior giving him authority over the sisters, Basilian sisters in Ukraine. It was post-Vatican, so there were some changes to the rule, and they explained some of that in the letter. But most importantly, giving Bishop Vasyl the authority over the Basilian sisters in Ukraine. The other 2 documents, the one on paper was from Cardinal Joseph Slipy from Rome, giving him instructions. As a bishop, it seems there were answers to questions that he had written to Cardinal Slipy, and different things are there, things like Martha is for Ivano-Frankivsk and Josefa is for Stanislavio. These were namings of sisters, superiors for the monasteries, and other things about marriages. And the one on cloth was also instructions to him as a bishop. And the one on cloth is interesting. Why on cloth? I, in fact, even met the woman his niece, who transferred these documents to Lviv. This document was sent to Yugoslavia, and she, who was in Croatia and Zagreb, sewed the cloth onto her skirt so that when she was going across the border to Lviv to deliver it to her uncle, Bishop Vasyl, that they would not find the cloth that was sewn into the seam, and thus it was smuggled over, because a paper would make noise as you would be searched on the border. So Blessed Vasyl had those 3 documents, and he carefully buried them in the garden. We were still unsure, is there more? These were very important documents. The next day I returned to the house where the documents were, where we had to dig to cover the hole. And when we arrived, Sister Josefa came out and said, was one of those documents on a cloth? And I said, yes. She says, well, then those were the documents. They, being older sisters, helped Blessed Vasyl in putting those documents into cellophane paper. And so she looked at those documents and saw them quite clearly. So we were very pleased to know that those documents were those documents that were covered. And when I told her what the documents were, that there were 3 documents from Rome, from Cardinal Slipe and from the Basilian Superior, she just grabbed her head and said, if those documents were found in our house by the KGB, surely we would have been arrested. And so by God's providence, we have now those documents here in our museum, in our archives, various precious documents, and a sign of the underground church, how they communicated one to another, and how Blessed Vasyl was able to receive instructions from the head of our church, the Cardinal Joseph Slipe, and how he continued to be a loyal, faithful bishop. Slava Isusu Christu, glory be to Jesus Christ.